Hello and welcome everyone to another one of our IPAF webinars. Today's topic will be compact lift safety guidance and best practices. Our presenter, I would like to introduce our presenter, which is going to be Eb Christensen. He's the president and CEO of Rootman Reachmaster North America, and he'll give us an insight of everything regarding compact lift safety. Over to you, Ebby.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And as Diego just said, my name is Ebbe Christensen. And I'm very delighted to have this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is compact lift, which has been pretty much my business for the past 23 years. So just very briefly about myself, I started in this back in 2000 when we pioneered the North American market with a Falcon product under the name Reachmaster. In 2005, I took over Denka distribution as well. And in 2008, we introduced a new concept for track-based lift by the Hinova model from Italy. I bought out Reachmaster in 2012 from the European owners and basically continued to grow the company to represent 8 international brands. And 8 years later, I sold it to Rootman in Germany, which is a leading manufacturer of truck-mounted equipment. We merged the company. Today it's called Rootman Reachmaster, and we are part of time manufacturing. And we still continue to focus on special lifts and represent a line of different brands you can see here. And I've had the pleasure of being a member of IPAF for many years and also the honor of being part of the North American Regional Council, including being its chair for 3 years. So I've been around this organization for quite a while, and I've also serviced on various industry boards within the lift industry. So enough about me. Let's get going to the categories here. But first and foremost, can you indicate if you have a full picture here, Diego? I just want to make sure that we don't block anything with the pictures here on the right-hand corner.
We good? No, it's okay. You're good to go.
Good. All right. So we are going to talk a little bit about definitions of the category, what has driven the demand for this type of equipment, and also what are the applications. So let's start right here with what is a compact lift. There's a lot of different names for them. Compact lift, of course, atrium lifts, compact crawler, narrow lift, and probably the name that most people knows it by elsewhere in the world is spider lifts. But ironically enough, we are not really in a position to use that name legally here in the US, as there's a company that has the spider lift term trademarked in a lot of different categories. This happened many years ago. It might be a changed situation today, but for legal reasons, we have always stuck to the compact lift here in North America, and that's what we're going to do in this presentation as well. So what defines a compact lift? First of all, it's a lift type that has a very long, narrow body with swing-out outriggers. Most brands today have adjustable outriggers so you can adjust to the surroundings. They are also characterized with being very narrow. So as we'll see in just a second, we can go through very limited access, doors. And also from a length and height point of view, they are very compact relative to the work height that they can provide. And typically, as a more or less industry standard today, the height of them is 6'6", so they can go through regular doors. A lot of the equipment on the market today also have a detachable basket, so you can actually take off the basket and make the unit even shorter during access and travel to and from work sites. So let's just look at the two main categories. We have the track-based units, which are in today's market providing work height opportunities from 35 to 170 feet work height. And that is, based on the about 12 different brands that's available here in North America today. Very compact measurements we just talked about before, up to about 72 feet work height. They are all less than 3 feet wide, which means they can go through single doors. Above approximately 75 foot work height, they are even less than 6 feet, which means that they can all go through double doors. So you have a piece of equipment here that is able to go from outside to inside and back out again, which is a huge benefit, as we'll see a little later. Then we also have wheelbase. They're a little bit more rare, but they are on the market. They provide work height from 95 to 138 feet work height, compact measurement, and kind of probably the most impressive is that they can go through single doors all the way up to 138 feet work height. So there's plenty of opportunities on the market today to cover basically a work height scenario from 35 to 170 feet work height. So the other things that is very characteristic about them are that they're lightweight. So they impose a minimum floor pressure under the wheels, tracks, or outriggers. And most of them will comply to the general building codes, which is 100 pounds per square feet. They all offset reach capabilities strictly with outriggers. So they are no weight really of significance to these type of equipment. They're self-propelled, so you don't have to push them, which is great. Dual power for most brands, which means that you can have both battery and combustion engine, or just a battery, or just combustion engine. So there's a variety of power options out there. Again, they can be used for in and outdoor use, easy to transport. And they are also somewhat fragile compared to other MUPs. MUPs are, the general description for lifts, in the sense that they are, designed to be as lightweight as possible, and at the same time provide extreme work capabilities as far as work height and side reach. So they have, compared to a lot of other lift type, they have an element of being a little bit more fragile when it comes to operational use of them. What's driving the demand? Well, there's several things that drive the demand. And one of the things is in Europe, a lot of these machines, or virtually all of them, are built in Europe these days and designed and comes from Europe, where the infrastructure had a format that required and the need to create very compact machines to get into old parts of the cities, courtyards, and also a high tradition of restoration of buildings and city centers, rather than tearing down and build a new, as we like to do in the U.S. Here in the U.S., it's been a combination of that, but indeed also the architectural design. What we've seen over the last 20 years is that the design of buildings go towards large atriums. We want to get more light in. People like to be surrounded by light. And it creates scenarios like you see right here with beautiful atriums that are very nice to be in and we're welcoming people. They, however, do create some maintenance challenges. For example, lights, sprinkler systems, HVAC systems, fire and smoke sensors. They're all sitting up in the ceiling area. The same thing can be said about security systems, audio systems, and emergency lighting. On the latter, we, unfortunately, on the worst possible background. But after 9/11, we saw a very big impact that a lot of facilities had to inspect and install emergency lighting in areas where they normally would not be able to get to. Then, of course, we have the general building maintenance, window cleaning, structural cleaning, repairs, sign and banner, replacement during holidays and so forth. So all in all, how can we reach these areas both efficiently and most importantly, safely? That was the question. The common thing for these tests are that you have limited access condition, you have surface condition. They can be structural. They can also be just the top surface, where you have breakpoints of marble or of tiles that you have to consider. You have what we call severe work height. That would be anything more than 20 feet in the sense that you should not be in a ladder taller than that. And then you have always time demands. All these facilities has to operate, so you have limited time to come in and do the work. So where they overlap all four, of course, is where you have the ideal solution, or the ideal, if you like, application for this. But all of these four circles represents typical applications for compact lifts. So when we look at it and the solutions we're looking for, these guys will not work. The usual suspects, as I call them. The scissor lifts, they're too small, have no side reach. The boom lift cannot go indoor. They're too big and they're too heavy for these applications. We all know human ingenuity, and we don't really need that either. As you can see from some of these pictures that everybody loves to show, there's no limit to what we humans can put ourselves into, and the danger that it represents. So as these fellows here has found out a long time ago, we humans, when we fall, we don't land on our feet like the cats do. So The answer is the compact lift, and that's what started back in 1977 in Denmark, in Europe, when they invented this category. Here's some different pictures. Picture speaks often a better representation than words, but limited access is one of the key things, that you have the ability indoor here to get machines through 3 feet doors. Excuse me. Outdoor, the same situation. You can have various restricted access where you again has to be benefiting from the narrow configuration. A couple of typical indoor applications, for example, the one on the right, where you typically have to set up a lift on a lower floor because there's no access to, in this case, a mezzanine, and they have to work on the ceiling area from a lower floor. The picture on the left is also typical, that you work up against fragile surfaces like glass, marble, stone, put in during construction. You want to make sure you don't damage those, and for cleaning purposes, you need something that's very controllable, which these units are. A couple of other ones here just to illustrate typical applications that you will find these in for indoor. Also, a lot of churches are in need of this. They have a lot of audio systems and cleaning operations to do, and the compact lifts are a very, very good tool for that. This is a little bit more extreme, but a good example also where you can go in very extreme settings, and in this case, it's a very narrow setting. And the only alternative for these guys in a facility like that would have been to scaffold the whole area into the pool, close down the facility for many weeks. Here, you roll in the machine during the night, do what you have to do, and you roll the machine out again in the morning, and can keep the facility open. So that's a key element also of the functionality of compact lifts. Of course, they are also used outdoor. On the picture to the right, you can see there's some windows in the lower right-hand corner indicating that we have actually a basement underneath this courtyard. So even though it looks like a solid surface, there's no way you would be able to put a boom lift or a truck-mounted lift in that area. Again, you need to utilize the lightweight characteristics of the compact lifts. Tree care has become also a very popular use. Up till, I would say, 15 years ago, they did not really look into this as an option. Today, it's become a very strong market for this type of equipment, because trees grow in backyards and other locations where you have the need to get in, as you can see on these various pictures here. So this was more a quick presentation on where the applications and how are they, distributed as far as the market goes. Let's go in and look a little bit more specifically, what does it take to work with these lifts? What is needed both from a training point of view, pre-checks and setting up and safe use. First question you gotta ask yourself when you operate any lift is, am I qualified to do this? Am I qualified to operate this lift safely? And that's a generic question that should always be answered, whether it's a compact lift or any type of lift equipment. But it becomes even more important here because the compact lifts, they all offset their reach with outriggers, not weight. That means they have a very different dynamic than a boom lift or a scissor lift. By nature, they're all top heavy. And when I say dangerous to drive on slopes, that's perhaps a strong word. But there's no doubt about that when you have a lot of the weight, which is the boom system that sits on the very top of the machine, everybody can understand that when you're on a slope, it doesn't take many degrees before the machine becomes unstable. So you really have to understand the features of the lift if you can adjust the tracks to a point where you can keep the machine level, or what is the maximum degrees I can operate the machine on, not just from a work point of view, but particularly from a transport point of view. They also offer more reach function than most other lifts. There's more features on these machines. So what you often find, or what many operators find, is that they can be a little intimidating when you start to see all the buttons and all the different things that these wonderful, wonderful machines can do. But that's exactly the beauty of them. They provide you safe reach capabilities in very difficult scenarios. So all of this caters into training, and the emergency lowering system are also different sometimes, because as you saw before in the picture, a lot of these lifts can reach up and over. So you cannot just have a pull-out lowering system like you would have on a scissor lift and just lower the lift, because you may be sticking out 35 feet over an obstacle. So you need to have a system that can pull back that outreach before you start lowering the machine, etc. So what is the answer to my question? Am I qualified? Well, as you can guess, since you're an IPAF organization presentation here, it's a lot about training. So you need to be fully trained to include the requirements. And now I need to move this box here a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. But I'm sorry, I can't read the last lecture here, but you can read it here. Fully trained to include the requirements, selection, inspection, training, maintenance, safe operation of it, as specified under ANSI and SIA A92.24 for each category. You have to be model specific on the familiarization prior to operated, and maintain competency. I'm sorry, guys, I'm from Denmark, so I'm still learning the language here. But anyway, competency after trained through ongoing evaluation by supervisors to ensure maintaining a previously trained person status as a qualified operator. As you can tell, this is all very formal and official language, but it's in there to make sure that everybody understands the different requirements. And of course, secure training and familiarization from qualified people. So you can't do like in the Holiday Inn commercials where you stayed at Holiday Inn for the night, and that's not a qualified person. It has to be either the rental company, the distributor, or the manufacturer, whoever is providing you your lift. They're the one that has to provide the proper training on it. So, in conclusion of that, most importantly, before you start anything, make sure you have the proper training to operate this specific type of equipment. So let's start look a little bit about the pre-use check. Like any equipment, you should always check it before the use of it. And do remember that if the lift is dirty, it can be difficult to inspect all the areas that you need. So a machine should always be cleaned before you do your inspection. So first and foremost, check that there's no damage that has occurred due to previous use, transport. There should be no parts missing, torn hoses or wires, leaks, cut tires, or disconnected cable. Everything that looks abnormal on a lift should be observed. You need to check the fluid level, whether it's the fuel, engine, or hydraulic oil. And of course, make sure that you only use manufacturers recommended, both brands, levels, type of fluid, so you are in compliance with what the machine is designed for. And for battery-driven units, you need to check the battery charge level on the units. On the track-based machines, you need to check the track condition for tension. It's very important that they do not slack. If they slack and you make a sharp turn with the lift, you can actually roll the track off, whether it's indoor or outdoor, and that is not recommendable to do in any location. You also want to look for tears in the tracks and sharp items in particular. If you take them inside, you want to make sure that it can be stones, it can be pieces of glass, a lot of things that can be from the outside that can get stuck in the tracks. And if you take it straight into a delicate floor, obviously you can do harm to the surface. So for one, you want to make sure that the track are as clean as possible and clear of items. And you should always also, we recommend at least that you always put some plywood or other sorts of protection on the floor down before you go in. Also, check all the emergency stop buttons and make sure that you check all of them. Different brands have different locations, and typically that's at least one in the basket area, and that's one on the machine, so that's at least two, and some of them would even have three. Make sure you check all movements and functions of the outrigger, spoons, jib, and the basket. Everything that can move, make sure you do that from the ground controls and everything works before you go into the air with the machine. Make sure you can read the labels, particularly on rental machines. That can be an issue because they're used to come back and people spray paint over them or whatever happened. But the labels are there for a reason. The manufacturers put these warning label for the very reason that you need to be aware of them. So if there's a label you cannot read, you need to figure out what that label should have been, so you can understand what that hazard eventually would be and can negate that in your works with it. For units that are, battery driven, most of the compact lifts will allow you to charge while you work, which means that you can set up the machine on the work side, and then you can start charging the machine right there with an extension cord. So make sure that your extension cord has no tears, has a solid ground connection, and of course, correct gauge as far as the power supply. Most machines run straight out of 110, 15, or 20 amp. So you just need to make sure you get your wires accordingly from a gauge and length relation. Of course, make sure that the safety harness and landing is free from damage, and the basket connections in where you have your attachment point is not damaged or safe to use. So those are all elementary things for any lifts, including the compact lifts. The next thing you want to use is check the axis. This guy has a very fancy Ferrari Roma, but as you can see in the picture, and it is a true picture, the streets of Rome was not wide enough for it, despite the name. So you need to check what is your axis situation. Obviously, you need to look at solid or soft surface. If you are taking a wheel-based machine on a soft surface, you've got to be very careful, not recommendable in general, whereas the track machines are happy on both solid and soft surfaces. You need to observe floor pressure restrictions. And even if the floors are structurally safe, what about the surface? Is there any sensitive surfaces like marble tiles, wood, or carpet that needs to be addressed? And of course, also any known hollow area underneath. When you get to the location, or if you are in a location where the machine lives in a certain area and needs to be taken to another location, you need to make sure that the area is safe for unloading. And, again, that the surface conditions will allow you to use the unit. Very importantly, the drive path from either lift offloading place and storage to the work site should be evaluated and investigated before you take the unit there. We don't see a lot of serious damage on these machines, thankfully, but when we see them, 95% of them are related to operator taking the lift into a driving path they have not checked before. And there can be many reasons that then damage the machine. Typical one is a tip over, where they will put it over a curbside or and other things that can destabilize the machine. So it's very important that you walk the path and make sure you observe any obstacles and anything you need to take into evaluation before you actually take the machine there. That includes, is it wide enough to accommodate turns? Is it solid enough as far as from a ground point of view, and it can carry the weight? Is there any inclination, stairs, vertical obstacles on the way from A to B you need to be aware of? Always be aware of anything that is covered, like a sewer, drainage grids, and so forth, because they may look solid for you to walk on, but if you put a track unit on it or wheel on it, you can actually go, some of these covers are not designed to take that weight. Again, be aware of drainage grids, thresholds, and of course, if you're indoor, be aware of elevator shafts, work shafts, which is the area right in front of escalators where they have their work zone when they work with them. On the elevator, if you have to use the elevator to take a unit from a lower floor to a higher floor, obviously, first thing is to check the dimensions of the elevator and the weight capacity. And also, is there any permanent obstacles in the ground? That means that the lift will have to move around. You can't move a chair, or whatever you can do, but a flower bed, for example, you cannot. If you do work on slopes, and if you have to travel with a machine on slope, you should never go on the side of the machine. You should always go in front or behind, simply for the reason that if, for whatever reason, the unit does not have an alarm system that gives you enough time, if you're going on a slope that's too steep, obviously the unit can tip over. So that's one of the areas where you need to be careful. Every time you take these machines on slopes, you've got to really look carefully into the manual and see what are the directions by the manufacturer. Of course, as far as getting into a building, do we have a single or double door? The height is that within the 6'6" we talked about a little earlier, Does the door open 100%? Sometimes, we forget that there are door handles, crash bars, or hinges that actually eats up of the 3 feet wide we have. And you will need all of it in many cases to get a unit in. Again, do you have a straight shot through the door once you're in? Remember that these units are fairly long compared to their width and height. So you need to make sure you don't have any immediate obstacles behind the door. So you can make the turn. Is the sharp turn, is the unit short enough to do it safely? And also, do you have combined in and outdoor access where you have to go? Sometimes we have to go through a building to get to a courtyard. So you need to make sure that both the indoor and the outdoor access is clear. And again, the permanent obstacles in the ground is very important. What a lot of people don't realize is that even paved and even concreted path, which could be a driveway, a walkway, sidewalks, they can actually have pipelines and other hollow areas under the drive path. And if you have any suspicion about that, and you should definitely check it with the building or the community or the authority that has the authority of the building. Good thing to look for is drains. If there's a lot of drains going underneath a walkway, you may want to take a look at how deep they are, and is that anything that can impact the weight you're going to put on the walkway. Same thing with paved courtyards, hotels, hospitals, office buildings. A lot of time they actually have basements or other type of hollow areas below that area, and you need to make sure that your lift is not heavier than this area can sustain. Of course, if you're outside, always, rain, snow, and freezing weather can make surfaces slippery, so you need to be careful with that when you set up. And likewise, if you're on asphalt, sun and heat can make that surface unstable. So check the worksite location for ground obstruction. You need to make sure that you have proper space for deploying the outriggers. As you saw in the initial slide, most units today have adjustable outriggers where you can swing them in typically 3 position. So that gives you some flexibility when you set up the units. They can, to a certain degree, accommodate the surroundings. But of course, you also need to look at aerial obstacles. Is there anything that can obstruct the reach area where you need to go to? Compact lifts, as I call it here, are often used in Mission Impossible situations. So very often you'll find that a lot of the applications have some aerial obstacles of some kind that you will need to be aware of both during the setup and how you set it up, and of course also when you're up and operating the lift. Here's a couple of examples where you have artwork hanging, or it can be structural pieces of the building that will be in the way for a direct reach. You might have to negate different angles and so forth. If you're outside, this is like for any lift you use, it's not just for the compact lift, but if you're outside, number one thing is make sure you keep proper distance to power lines. And some of the manufacturers in the market today will provide a fiberglass basket. In particular, the tree care industry like to work with that because it offers some protection for the operator as far as branches and other elements getting into the basket. The danger with that is that it can be perceived that it is an insulated machine. And the majority and the far majority of the companies are not insulated, even if they have an insulated basket. Or a fiberglass basket, sorry. There are some brands out there that offers insulated machines. So in that case, you need, of course, to check what kind of voltage they are insulated for. But my rule of thumb is always be very careful about this. When you see a fiberglass basket, that does not indicate that the machine is insulated. And you will have a label like you see on the left side, typically on the unit as well. Wind, when you're outside, any lift, same thing with a compact lift, you need to make sure that you have a good understanding on what is the wind rating. Typically for most of these units, you are at 28 miles per hour or 12.5 meters per second. Excuse me one second. And it's important to check this on the lift as well as the manual. I always recommend that you listen to, if there's any discrepancy, listen to what's on the lift. Sometimes you'll find that manuals have been swapped. And if the provider of the machine is not available, aware of the differences that can be between two models, you have the risk that you may have an operating manual that is covering 90% of your lift operations, but it is from this particular point designed for another lift. So therefore, always use the serial plate that should be on any lift you use. Make sure you check that for the wind rating. If it's not there, don't use the lift until you have called the provider of the lift and have solid information about what is the wind rating for it. Obviously, check the weather forecast when you're outside. That goes for any lift again. You don't want to be out in a lift with an aluminum basket, and some of them have an aluminum arm in lightning. We'll leave that to Frankenstein and other of that type. So stay away from that. Pre-use check of the surroundings, is also on indoor. Part of that is to make sure that you rope off or fence off the area where the lift works. You want to avoid that people can walk underneath, and also you should hopefully not drop anything from the basket. But if you do, you want to make sure that you have a clear area below the lift and around the work area of the lift, not just straight on it, but where the machine can swing out to. You want to make sure that that's free and clear of anybody walking in there. If you use the machine outdoor, traffic can be an issue. So you obviously need to secure the work zone around the lift with cones or other type of markings. And if we have an application where there's a lot of traffic on the road, we always recommend that you get a vehicle with a flashing light parked in the driving direction, blocking the lifts. So there's no, it's easier for people to see there is a hazard here, because sometimes, depending on the color of the lift or the buildings and where it is, people may not see the lift before it's too late. So make sure that if a very traffic road, a very busy road, you definitely need to be very careful as far as how you set it up. So once we have now both understood what our training should be for the lift, we talked about what we need to check on the lift. We talked about what we need to check on the surrounding. It's time to set up the lift and get started. So it's important to understand the reach envelope, how we deploy outriggers, how you're setting it up safely, and of course, more importantly of all, how you safely use the unit. So the first thing you really need to understand is the dynamics of the lift model. And here you will need to refer to the manufacturer's diagrams. On most lifts, they are present on the machine, but in some cases, you'll have to go to the manual and take a look at it there. What's important is to understand that no matter brand or type, they all have their maximum horizontal reach either to the front or the rear of the lift. That is typically where you have an ability to make a combination of the outrigger setting and the horizontal reach to get a maximum reach. So when you set up the lift, it's very important that you position it correctly as far as where your work target area is relatively to the unit's reach capability. That will make a big difference when you start using it, because if you do not, and you are getting to the point where you want to reach a certain area, but you are now going over the side of the lift and you're starting to put a lot of weight on one outriggers, the machines will, in most cases, automatically shut down because you are reaching an area that's not stable and it's outside its what we call the safe reach envelope. So you will have to come all the way down, take the machine down, move it around, set the outriggers up again, and then start over again. So it's very important that you do some research in advance. What are the areas you want to reach? What is your horizontal reach relatively to the vertical reach? Because as you can see on this diagram here, the numbers that lifts normally are characterized with as far as work height is straight up above the platform of the lift and straight up. There's not really any, of course, any outreach there. Once you need to have the combination between, say, a 30-foot side reach, and you also need, to have 30 feet work height. You need to make sure that the reach diagram of the unit can cater into that. And all the brands will have different type of outrigger diagram, reach diagrams, but they will all have the characteristic that the higher you get up, the less reach on the side. So which is, the dynamics for most lifts. But again, as I said, with the compact lifts having the outriggers as the counter measurements against reach, you cannot just, turn another, 16 degrees to the left, because you might turn out of the safe radius versus a boom lift where you can do that, because it's the weight in the bottom that gives it the stability. So the first thing you do is you swing out the outriggers and ensure that the outriggers are properly locked with a pin system. Again, different band, different solutions, but most commonly for them is that this is a manual feature. And this is the feature that you really need to be paying attention to, because for many lifts, that is really the only thing that you need to make sure is properly done. For the rest of it, the lift has built-in safety factors and sensors and so forth that will limit your operations to be only within a safe operational reach mode. Some machines have sensors that will tell you that the outrigger is probably locked. Others will not. Depends on the steering system, whether they're canvas steering system or they are relay based. So it's very important, if you use different brands of machines, that you are aware of whether you have an alarm system that will tell you if the pin is locked or not. And if not, obviously you need to double check that manually. Whether you're indoor or outdoor, you need to use outrigger pads. I know that some machine comes with rubber legs or rubber feet, if you like. But all these machines, to a certain degree, have movement on the outrigger. So you slide them when you raise the machine up from the ground. So that's one reason you want to always protect the surface. When you're outdoor, obviously you need to protect your outrigger against sinking into the ground. Most brands will have sensors that will detect if the support is unstable. So you want to make sure that when you set up the machine, that the surface is stable. And if you're on grass or other soft areas, use a big outrigger pad that will distribute the weight for one and the pressure, but it will also help you secure that you don't have any movement on the outrigger once you're in the air. Make sure that the tracks is lifted clear off the ground. This is a common mistake a lot of operators do. They think that all they need to do is just have the outriggers down to the ground so they touch, and it would be a benefit that the tracks are also on the ground, because it all helps to stabilize it. That's incorrect. You need to lift the tracks always clear off the ground. Depending on manufacturer's recommendations, some are 6 foot, 6 inches, up to 1 feet. Some will go up to 2-3 feet, which can add extra work height. But you need to check with the manufacturer's recommendation as far as setting it up. But you always need to raise the tracks off the ground. The reason being that the chassis of these units are built with the same philosophy like an aircraft. It has to be flexible. So there are flexing in the outriggers and in the chassis. And if the tracks touches the ground, what will happen is that when that flexibility is going on, it will be enough for it to push down on the tracks to the point where an outrigger loses its pressure as far as contact. Not that it will go up in the air. You cannot see any of this by the naked eye. This is something that is done by the sensors. But this will mean that the machine stops operating. You have to come down again, set it back up again, because the machine reads it as if I have unstable surface underneath my outrigger. So again, make sure you lift it up when you use it. Also make sure that the body of the machine is always 100% level on both directions. You can do this either manually by adjusting the outriggers on the handles, or for most brands today, this is a function that's auto level, where there's just one button and the machine will set up an auto level on all 4 outriggers. When it's done, it's always a good idea to take a look at the indicator and make sure that you are in a level position. Before I go up, make sure that all the movement works, again, from the ground control, or if it has a wireless remote control, you should also be able to run all the operational movements of the machine from that before you go into the basket. Make sure that the tools that you take with you up there is arranged in a safe manner, so you limit the risk of dropping it when you're up working at height. So now we've checked all this. We've checked all the things you need to do. So here's the most important thing, in my opinion, you need to bring with you, your cell phone, and make sure it's charged, because having a cell phone when you're up operating, that's a great tool. In the old days, you know, when we began this 23 years ago, we would have radio systems going from the bottom to the top. And you can imagine, you know, for a 50-foot lift, that may not be the big case because you might be able to shout up to the guy. But if you are talking 90 feet or higher, you all of a sudden have a situation where you cannot communicate clearly with the ground. So bring your cell phone, and more importantly, make sure that you always have a qualified and trained co-worker that is at the ground controls at any given time, and make sure you exchange phone numbers too. So if there is an issue, you have an ability to communicate with ground control, so to speak. So always remember this: you should never work alone on a job site in a lift. You should always make sure you have a competent co-worker that can work the ground control safely. And this doesn't matter whether it's a compact lift or any lift. But as I said earlier on, given the relatively higher complexity of a compact lift, this is even more important, because there will be fewer people that knows about these machines than, say, a regular boom lift or a scissor lift. Of course, make sure that you use all required PPE, depending on what your work task is. Of course, it goes without saying, you should never, ever go up in a lift without the safety harness, and make sure that your lanyard is up to date and approved and without any cuts or any other failure. Most cases, we recommend hard hat, gloves and safety glasses, but there can be different requirements for different jobs. So make sure you have a full understanding on what is required of you when you go up. This should be logical. Unfortunately, it's not. You should always keep both feet at the basket floor at all times. You should never step on the railing or use any step ladders or any other stepping device. The machine is built to have only your feet on the ground. It's not safe to operate it in any other way, period. So when you see guys like this, that is on the lower part of the railing, that's a big no-no. Guys like this has come up with a system, and some of these systems, you know, maybe somewhat, you know, safe, but still, don't do it. Don't put anything up there. You have to have your feet on the ground, on the basket. Oh, sorry, let me just go back a little bit too quick here. So don't overreach. That's another thing where you have a risk of fall. Make sure that you only reach what is a normal arm's length out of the basket. Don't do that lat stretch with that foot and I can grab it, and then you lose your footing in the basket. And even if you have a safety harness, you do not want to have the experience of going overboard. This should be logical as well. Don't leave the basket, especially not like this idiot here that is walking without a safety harness on what could be a slippery building here in the wintertime. This could never happen in North America. Of course, this is, of course, somewhere else. But again, don't leave the basket. Stay in the basket. So, of course, be aware of your surroundings when you use the machine. Entrapment has been a big item in the lift safety discussions over the years, as when you go up in the lift and, you know, look behind you and make sure you don't get trapped or trapped, you know, on a part of the building or other thing that is in the way of the machine. So this can include, you know, as I said, you know, permanent structures of the building. It can be stairs if you're underneath stairs, or it can be, for example, if you're underneath escalators. Believe it or not, but all those three hazard areas are common when you work indoor. And I know a lot of operator with experience that has been having close calls because they feel they have a good sense of where the machine is. But the fact is that the higher you get up, often the more you lose your sense of distance. So always make sure you look up if you go up and make sure that you keep a good safe distance to any overhead obstacles. This is one of the things I cannot stress enough. Again, this goes for all lifts, but particularly on the compact lifts, you should never overload the basket. You must follow the manufacturer's maximum load instructions, whatever that is. Looking at it, it would be typically from 440 to 600, maybe 650 pounds. But you always need to look for what is the maximum basket load capacity and never overload it. Compact lifts, as I said earlier, is more fragile. So often the baskets are made of lightweight aluminum. They're not over-dimensioned in any form or shape to take on extra weight. They're designed to work strictly within the posted limits. So the rule of thumb is that you only take down what you take up. So you go on the lift with your tools and whatever, that's fine. That's what you take down. Now, we all know that sometimes you have to take a light fixture or whatever down. And of course, the basket is a good way to do that. But you really need to make 100% sure that you're within the total weight limits, including the weight of the operator, any other tools. Will the lift tip over? Not necessarily. If you do enough, if you put an air condition down and you're all the way out, yes, you are at the very edge where something serious can happen. But you will, in many cases, destroy the sensor systems on the machines. You can destroy actually the basket mounts because, again, they are designed to that. So what will happen if you overload it, you may be lucky and can get machines safely down on emergency controls, but you will not be able to operate again before you spend thousands of dollars to repair it. But again, from a safety point of view, never ever overload the basket. So let's talk a little bit about service and maintenance, annual inspections and so forth here, as far as what's the best way to maintain these machines. I focus more on the use of them, so this will be relatively short, but obviously, with about 10 to 12 manufacturers right now on the market, you need to really look for what is each manufacturer's requirements as far as the scheduled inspections and for maintenance. One of the things you need to be aware of is that different brands can have different intervals, and even different components on the unit can have different intervals. So sometimes you will find that the lift system has requirements for inspections or maintenance at certain levels, whereas the undercarriages will have a much more frequent level. So make sure that you understand what is the requirement from the manufacturer. Also, beware of the environment where the unit is used. That can alter the schedules. Example, we have equipment that works straight on the ocean. They get a lot of salty air. So all the areas that we normally check for rust or corrosion that we normally would check on an annual basis, these machines are checked on a quarterly basis to make sure that we don't have any corrosion starting in those areas. Another thing can be if you have a lot of sand, if you have a lot of abrasive. The most extreme is shipyards. Units that operate in shipyards needs to be inspected very frequently because of the environment they're in. And it can also be if you have any other abrasive chemicals or whatever that is in the vicinity of where the lift is used, you may have to have a different regime as far as inspections and maintenance that you would have on a normal use. So be aware of that. As a minimum, the unit must go through the annual safety inspection to comply with both ANSI and OSHA. Again, each manufacturer has their individual demands on what needs to be tested. If there's any doubt, make sure that you consult with the manufacturer. What is the minimum requirements? Some machines have very complex outrigger-based sensors that needs to be adjusted, and if they're not adjusted correctly, you can actually have a situation where the machine can reach more, it starts to reach longer than it should, and it could be a tip hazard, or the other way around. You will not be able to get the maximum reach out of the machine because these sensors are not adjusted correctly. So make sure that whoever's doing the annual safety inspection of the machine is qualified. And then as an operator, make sure that you don't go on a machine that does not have a valid annual inspection certificate or sticker on it. So all the machines will have a little sticker that will show typically the year and the date, and there will be an arrow that indicates when the next inspection is up. And in particular, if you use it in any public applications, OSHA is very strict about it. If they come on site and find a machine that's out of inspection, it will be grounded, and there can be fines and delays in complying with completing the work there. We talked a little bit about the electric machines, the battery-powered machines, particularly the lithium machines today. They need to be plugged in also when they're not in use. And just like a lot of other battery systems, they have a trickle charger built into them. But it's very important, particularly on the lithium battery, which is, which been on the market, I would say, the last 10 to 13 years for the compact lifts. It's very important that they are not left in a corner discharged for a long time, because lithium batteries has the nasty habit of, if you have to be able to equalize the cells at a certain level for them to be chargeable. If the cells falls below that level, you just threw out $35,000+ of batteries that you'll need to replace. So make sure that it's plugged in. And again, most of these machines will require only a regular 110 volt, 15 or 20 amp outlet. So there's not a need for any, specific installation from a power point of view. Like all manufacturers and of equipment, cars and machines, we are no different from a lift point of view. Please always use OEM components. There is a reason for that. These machines are designed the way they are. And I would say in particular on the compact lift side, it's important to use OEM equipment, because they are designed with that dilemma that you want to be as lightweight as possible. You want to be on the edge as far as how much you can reach, and you want to be able to reach as far as you can horizontal. So you're really on the cutting edge as far as what can happen. So things are designed in a certain way. So, for example, some of the brands on the market has a profile of their boom system that is more like a hexagon, like compared to a quadrant and so forth. And there can be a lot of other areas where particular structural components are designed a certain way. So don't try to replace it with something that's not OEM. For your own safety, please always go OEM. The same thing with the various part of first line of maintenance, if you like, as far as hydraulic oil and replacing, if it's not a lithium, it's just a regular 12-volt battery or whatever. At least make sure, if you don't go with an OEM part, make sure you go with whatever they recommend, particularly on the hydraulic side. Make sure you have the right oil type and the right brand. That's all listed by the manufacturers for each of their machines. And that is the way you keep the machine healthy, but more importantly, you keep the machine safe. Last but not least on this, don't make assumptions or qualified guesses. Your life is way too important, or anybody's life is way too important for that. This is not the type of equipment where you can make your own calls whether this is a safe or not maintenance procedure. You have to follow the manufacturer's instruction. And if you cannot find what you look for, don't do like I do when I'm repairing my old cars. I go on YouTube and find somebody else that's done the same mistake and hopefully found a solution for it. No, please don't do that. Contact your dealer, contact the rental company, contact the manufacturer. Make sure you get competent and product specific. And by that, I mean even down to the particular serial number, because manufacturers change equipment over years. Many of these machines can last 20 or 10 or 20 years. So you may have an older machine. So when you ask for the information, make sure you go down to the very product specifics of that serial number, because most manufacturers can go back and say, okay, this is generation ABC, and this is what you need, and this is what you need to do. So very important on that. I hope I've not put everybody here to sleep, but this is the time, and I don't know how this works, Diego, but this is where we open up for questions. And I appreciate your time here, all of you. And Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Ebba, this is Tony. We don't have any questions that showed up in the chat box, but as you can imagine, your very detailed presentation, great job, did prompt a couple of questions and comments that I would like to add. While you are very clear from a recommendation in general best practice of don't put your feet above the work platform, please note that there are elements that are out there, devices by manufacturers. So unless it's approved by the manufacturer with safe use procedures, and the same thing is when exiting at height, there are practices. So that again is do not do that unless there's a specific procedure approved by the manufacturer. So both of those cases, you are correct. Best practices is those are things that shouldn't be done normally, but the standards and manufacturers have the ability to offer options and guidance on if you're going to do those two things, how to do them properly. Right. One item that I always had a question on is the outrigger pattern for the use of these machines. An example would be when you're traveling with the machine to put it into position. Is there times where it's recommended that those outriggers are out to give you stability when the space is available to make sure that you don't have a tip over?
Yes, certainly. If you are driving in a slope terrain, or anywhere really where you're driving where there could be a hazard of a tip over to the side, if the space allows for it, it's definitely a great idea, and I should have included that. Thanks, Tony. That you deploy the outrigger and keep it like a foot or so above ground. That way, should you have misjudged the slope and go on a steeper slope than you should, or the machine slides or whatever, you have a catch feature there. So that's a great idea to do that. Unfortunately, probably in 50 plus of the situations, we don't have that luxury, because the machine travels through narrow walkways to a backyard or to a courtyard, or up through some walkways, handicap ramps, for example. But it's a really good thing to do if you have the option to do it. Absolutely.
And secondly, is the outrigger pattern is a very large footprint, typically for its maximum elevation. Do most or all of these machines allow you to have the outrigger pattern smaller than the maximum setup? And if yes, what is the impact of having that on the mobility, or I would say height and reach of a machine if you go to a smaller pattern? Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, the answer is yes to all of that, in the sense that obviously there is a ratio between the work height and side reach of the machine and the footprint. So as you can imagine, the taller vertical height and the more side reach, the bigger the general footprint will be. So the standard, for example, if you take a 50-foot lift, will typically, be in the neighborhood of, standard would be 10 to 12 feet. When you go up in a 90-footer, you go typically 12 to 15 feet, maybe higher, as far as the standard, footprint for the outrigger setup. Now you can do, as I said earlier, most of them have, the adjustable outrigger where you have several positions, typically 3, and you can do what you just suggested, that you can put them in a more narrow position than the maximum position. When you do that, you of course limit the stability on the side reach, but you strengthen, if you like, the horizontal reach front and aft. So the impact of putting a unit in narrow setting would be that you will have your outreach to the front and to the rear. Some machines are able to monitor that the outriggers are in narrow, and that means that they will allow you to have a reduced side reach to the side. So even if the outriggers are set in narrow configuration, front and aft, it will still allow you to go over the outriggers to the side and have a limited, typically about half of what is the normal horizontal reach of the unit. And there are other machines on the market, they simply lock up that you cannot turn to the side. You know, when you're narrow, you can only go to the front or to the rear. You cannot go to the side. So those are the consequences. And that's brand, you know, depending on which brand you have.
Thank you. You did give me a piece of information that I was not aware of, and that's that when you're setting your outriggers up, the necessity to raise the tracks or chassis 6 to 12 inches above grade. Is that a specific requirement with all the equipment that you're dealing with?
Yes, it is simply necessary because, as I said, there is an element of flexibility in the chassis, or the sandwich, as we sometimes call it, which is the main body where the outriggers is attached to. And as you can imagine, when the machine operates in horizontal position, maybe 30, 40 feet out, and you have both weight, that's, you know, of course, there's some movement of the arm. There has to be some flexibility in the chassis to accommodate for those movements. And that's why that you cannot have the tracks or the wheels touching the ground, because you can have a situation where the machine kind of, if you can imagine, if you put a lot of weight into the center, as you raise the boom up to maximum vertical height, you have a lot of weight now in the center that can press the chassis down a little bit. So now the tracks or the wheels are supporting the lift. And that means that the outriggers get light. And as I said in my presentation, it's not something you normally can see. You should normally not be able to see with your naked eyes. But when that happens, the sensor in the outrigger will trigger an immediate stop because it senses movement on the support side. So that is the characteristic for any of the brands and any of the concepts, whether it's wheel or track based. Always lift them clear off the ground, 100% on the outriggers.
There's one last question I'll pose at you from Steve. It's I may have missed it during this. Did you go over the importance of outrigger pads needing to be on firm level ground even when the machine is designed to level on a slope?
Good point. And no, I did not go specifically into that, but it's a great point. That if you are on a slope and you set up the machine on the slope, typically on a solid surface, it can be difficult to, if you like, dig out a level plateau for the outrigger pad. And I would say, as long as you are on a solid surface, concrete or whatever, and you have a regular pad and you have the outrigger leg on that, and you are within the manufacturer's limits, you can have the pad not sitting level. If you are on a soft surface, grass, gravel, or whatever, where you do not have the same element of friction and solid friction, and where you can have movement in the underground, it's very important that you, so to speak, dig up a level plateau for the outrigger pad, even though you're on the slope, and that way deploy the outriggers down on that. So that's a great point, Steve, wherever you are. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, Eva, thank you very much for a very informative presentation for our group. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us on today's sessions. We will have other webinars that our North American Regional Council will offer in the marketplace during the rest of this year. This particular webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the IPAF website, which is IPAF.org, to a YouTube channel, so that this
guys,
can be...
sorry, guys, the IPAF YouTube channel, most of the webinars are there. Once we are done with this, in a couple of days will be uploaded, and everybody who registered for this webinar will get a link so they can share it and view it afterwards. So thank you very much. This was like spot on the clock, Abby. Very well done. And yeah, see you in the next one, Tony.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for listening. I appreciate it. Have a safe and good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, all. Be safe.